The newly appointed top scholar knelt before the entire Qianglin banquet and declared, 3 nights ago Miss Shen took the initiative and entered this subject's residence. She has already lost her purity, so I beg your majesty to grant us marriage and fulfill our union. I stared at his gentle, upright face and suddenly remembered the previous life, when he had forced poison down my throat. Even then, he had spoken to me in that same soft, coaxing tone. Hold on just a little longer, Zhaoning. You've been reborn. You returned at the exact moment Wei Linchuan publicly ruined your reputation and begged for your hand in front of everyone. The grand hall fell deathly silent. All the civil officials turned their eyes toward me. The emperor on the high throne darkened his expression. Shen Zhaoning, is what Lord Wei says true? I rose slowly, adjusted my sleeves, stepped into the center of the hall, and knelt with my back straight and proud. Your Majesty, it is not. Wei Linchuan lifted his head to look at me, his expression freezing. He probably never expected that in this life I would remain calm instead of panicking and tearfully defending myself the way I had before. I met his gaze and spoke each word clearly. 3 nights ago, this subject was at Baoguo Temple south of the city, lighting eternal lamps for my late elder brother and copying sutras until dawn. Both the abbot and the Shen family guards who accompanied me can testify. As for top scholar Wei, we have only met twice once at the spring examination results announcement, and once today at this banquet. This subject does not understand why he would slander me so viciously, but I absolutely refuse to accept it. Soft murmurs immediately rippled through the hall. I heard someone whisper, her elder brother, Shen family's eldest son, passed away only 100 days ago. Someone else said, the legitimate daughter of the Shen family has always upheld propriety. How could she sneak into a man's residence in the middle of the night? But what kind of man is Wei Linchuan? He rose through the ranks on nothing but a glib tongue and a reputation for literary talent. In my previous life, it was exactly that scholarly, honorable facade that had deceived everyone and destroyed me completely. Sure enough, he quickly composed himself and kowtowed forcefully before the emperor. Your Majesty, this subject would never dare deceive the throne. When Miss Shen left that night, she dropped a handkerchief. He produced a white silk handkerchief from his sleeve. Embroidered in the corner was the character, Ning. It was indeed mine. In the previous life, that very handkerchief had sealed my fate as an adulteress. The Shen family had lost all face. My father had been furious beyond words, yet he could only clench his teeth and marry me off. Only after the wedding did I learn the truth. Wei Linchuan had never loved me. The person who had truly visited his residence that night was not me. It was the current third princess, Xiao Lingyi. Witnesses had seen the princess's carriage stopped at the back alley of the top scholar's mansion. Wei Linchuan feared death and Xiao Lingyi feared losing face even more, so the two of them had worked together to shove me forward as their scapegoat. The Shen family became their stepping stone, and in the end I died in the dungeons of the Wei residence. When the poison burned through my veins, Xiao Lingyi stood beside me, tilting my chin up with her fingers and smiling triumphantly. Shen Zhaoning, you have occupied the position of Madame Wei for so long. It's time to repay the favor. Don't worry after you die, this princess will ensure Linchuan gives you a proper burial. After all, you have covered up this princess's indiscretions for so long, you still have some value. Only then had I finally understood. My entire life had been nothing but a pawn on someone else's chessboard. Thinking of that moment, I looked at the handkerchief and suddenly laughed. Top scholar Wei, this handkerchief does indeed belong to me. Wei Linchuan's eyes lit up. He opened his mouth to speak, but I continued. However, in the afternoon 3 days ago, this handkerchief went missing. That day, several people in my courtyard who borrowed my jewelry touched my dressing case. More than one person did so. The moment the words left my lips, my younger sister Shen Rozhen, seated among the womenfolk, trembled so violently she nearly dropped her wine cup. I tilted my head and looked straight at her, asking slowly, Little sister, why don't you tell everyone? Shen Rozhen's face turned deathly pale. She forced herself to stand. Eldest sister, why are you dragging me into this? I don't know anything. I laughed coldly. In the previous life, I only thought she was shallow and fond of fighting over things. It wasn't until I was locked in the dungeon that she shamefully confessed she had long admired Wei Linchuan and had helped him steal my calligraphy, handkerchief, and sachets. She had said, Eldest sister, don't blame me. Who told you to have everything while I had to fight for every scrap? Now she was still exactly the same. I kowtowed once more before the emperor. Your Majesty, this subject requests that my father investigate every maid in my courtyard and check the record of who entered and left my private storeroom. Let him see who touched my belongings 3 days ago. Top scholar Wei is trying to claim I lost my virtue to him with nothing but a single handkerchief. How absurd. The emperor's face grew even colder. Wei Linchuan realized the situation had turned against him, and suddenly changed his tone. This subject's feelings for Miss Shen are sincere at first sight. Even if she did not come to my residence of her own accord that night, there must have been some misunderstanding. This subject is willing to take full responsibility and marry her honorably. I will never let Miss Shen suffer the slightest grievance. What a perfect line, willing to take full responsibility. In the previous life I had been deceived by exactly that deep devoted act of his. Everyone in the hall thought the talented and handsome top scholar Wei was graciously willing to marry a girl already tainted by rumor, elevating her from disgrace. None of them knew what kind of life I had lived after marrying into the Wei family. By day he was gentle and affectionate. By night he turned cold and forced me to play along with his little theater. He would say, "Zhaoning, Lingyi's status is too noble. She cannot afford any mistakes. The Shen family has already boarded my ship. There is no turning back. Be good, and I will give you the dignity you deserve." Dignity? I almost laughed out loud. I turned toward the emperor and said calmly, "Your Majesty, this subject does not wish to marry him. This subject already has someone in her heart." The hall fell so silent one could hear a pin drop. The emperor frowned. "Who is it?" A thin layer of cold sweat broke out on my back, but my face showed no trace of unease. Junior Minister Lu Dingzhou of the Court of Judicial Review. In this life, I am betting everything on Lu Dingzhou. I am betting that he will be the same man who, even when no one else believed me, still investigated the truth. I am betting that his feelings for me were never mere casual kindness. In the previous life, after my death, my lingering soul had watched him spend entire nights poring over old case files in the Court of Judicial Review, reopening my case. By then the Shen family had already fallen. Wei Linchuan, backed by the third princess, held overwhelming power. No one in the court dared touch the Wei family's affairs except Lu Dingzhou. He came from the northern marquise's estate, entered the Court of Judicial Review at 15, and was ruthless, iron-willed, and completely unafraid of authority. Everyone in the capital called him cold-blooded. I used to think the same, because we had never gotten along. I found him too sharp. He found me an arrogant highborn lady. Every meeting ended in argument. We had never once been civil. But after I died, he was the only one who collected my corpse, cried out for my innocence, and uncovered the evidence that my father had been framed. It was only then, from an old letter he had always kept on his person, that I learned the man who had saved me on the Lantern Festival night many years ago was him. The flower lantern I had casually given away. He had kept it all this time. His cold face and biting words had only ever been a mask. Unfortunately, by the time I realized everything, it was far too late. In this life, I refused to be late again. The emperor stared at me fixedly. "You claim you admire Lu Dingzhou?" I kowtowed. "Yes, does he know?" I paused for the briefest moment, then answered without changing color, "He knows." Wei Linchuan's expression finally cracked. He stared at me, eyes surging with fury and suspicion. "Zhaoning, why drag someone else into this just to spite me?" I raised my head and looked at him, my voice clear and crisp. "Top scholar Wei, you are mistaken. This subject and you have no relationship whatsoever. What is there to be angry about? On the contrary, top scholar Wei keeps claiming I snuck into your residence at night, yet you produce a handkerchief that had already gone missing as proof. If this subject were more timid or less eloquent today, would I have been forced into a corner by you? Would I have had no choice but to marry you? I only wish to ask one question. Why does top scholar Wei insist that I accept this charge?" Having spoken, I deliberately glanced toward the princess's seat. Xiao Lingyi sat perfectly upright in her deep red palace gown, her face betraying nothing, but the hand resting on her knee had clenched into a white fist. With that single glance, the emperor's expression turned completely icy. "You are not a fool, and neither is anyone else in this Qianglin hall. Wei Linchuan's actions today are clearly meant to suppress something. For a newly appointed top scholar to act so hastily and lose his composure, the matter absolutely cannot be a simple affair between a man and a woman." The emperor's voice deepened. "Someone summon Lu Dingzhou. I wish to hear whether there is any truth to the matter between him and Shen Zhaoning. As for Miss Shen's handkerchief," he glanced at Shen Ruzhen and continued, "hand it over to me as well." Shen Ruzhen's legs gave out and she collapsed to her knees. Xiao Lingyi's face finally drained of all color. I lowered my eyes, hiding the cold smile at the corner of my lips. The first step is done. After the Qianglin banquet ended, the moment I stepped out of the Xuande gate, I was stopped by my father's men. First, young miss, the master requests your immediate return to the residence. I did not hesitate. Turning, I boarded the carriage. Along the way, Shen Rozhen wept without stopping. I only borrowed the handkerchief for 2 days. I truly had no other intentions. My legitimate mother was trembling with rage and refused even to look at her. My father sat in the seat of honor, his face so dark it was terrifying. Joning, why did you suddenly mention Lu Dingzhou in the hall today? I knelt without pretending to be confused. Because if I had not mentioned him, I would have been forced by Wei Linxuan today to admit to an illicit affair. My father said coldly, you and Lu Dingzhou have never gotten along. How could he possibly testify for you? I lifted my head and looked at my father, speaking softly. Father, what if I told you I had a very vivid dream? The room fell silent. I did not reveal my rebirth. I only said the dream had felt too real. So real that when I woke, my hands and feet were ice cold and I could hardly breathe. I told them I had dreamed that Wei Linxuan proposed to me, that the Shen family had agreed to the marriage to quell the scandal, that he was secretly involved with the third princess and had used the Shen family as a shield, leveraging my father's power in the Ministry of Rights to pave his own path. I had also dreamed that my father was framed for cheating in the imperial examinations. My second uncle was demoted, the entire Shen family was confiscated, my legitimate mother died of illness, and Shen Rozhen turned around and became Wei Linxuan's concubine. I even told them that my elder brother's death had not been an accident. Everyone in the room changed color instantly. My father shot to his feet. What did you say? I clenched my palms tightly, forcing myself to stay calm. Before he died, my elder brother had been investigating the salt transport accounts and discovered a large sum of silver flowing into the princess's residence. His death was far too convenient. Wei Linxuan passing the imperial examinations was also far too convenient. Father, today in the hall he tried so desperately to drag me down, not because he cherishes me, but because 3 nights ago, the person who truly entered his residence, it was someone else. My father's face turned ashen. My mother gripped the edge of her robe, her voice shaking. Joning, do you have evidence? Not yet, I answered honestly. But if father investigates the carriages entering and leaving the back alley of the top scholar's residence that night, questions the princess's close attendants, and looks into whom Shen Rozhen has met these past few days, you will know I am not speaking nonsense. My father stared at me for a long time. Having spent years in the officialdom, he understood the stakes perfectly. Once certain words were spoken, there was no turning back. If I was merely a boudoir girl spouting nonsense, the Shen family would be implicated. But if what I said was true, then for the Shen family to retreat now would mean eternal doom. After a long silence, my father said heavily, someone locked the second young miss in the ancestral hall. Without my order, no one is to see her. Shen Rozhen wailed and lunged forward. Father, I didn't do anything. She had only gotten half the sentence out before she realized her slip and bit her lip hard. Everyone in the room had heard clearly. Wei Lang, very good. My father closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his gaze was ice cold. After Shen Ruzhen was gagged and dragged away, he looked at me. Jiaoning, if your gamble is wrong, you will drag the entire Shen family into a deadly trap. I looked straight at him and said slowly, Father, if I had not gambled today, the Shen family would already be finished. I do not ask you to believe me immediately, I only ask for 3 days. Within 3 days, I will tear open the affair between Wei Linxuan and the third princess for everyone to see. My father remained silent for a long time before finally nodding. Very well. I give you 3 days. My heart lightened slightly, yet I felt no relief, because I knew the real battle had only just begun. That night, Chen Mama died. She was the one who had accompanied me to Baoguo Temple 3 nights earlier, the very person who could prove I had never been at the top scholar's residence. When I rushed to her small courtyard, the gate was wide open, and the room was in chaos. Chen Mama lay on the floor, her throat slit in a single clean cut. She could not even utter a complete sentence. I knelt and grasped her hand. Her mouth was full of blood, but her eyes were still clear as she clutched my sleeve tightly. Young miss, it was people from the princess's side after all. My gaze darkened, I asked softly, Mama, did you see anything else? Chen Mama struggled to breathe. That night, back alley, carriage. The curtain embroidered with golden crabapple flowers. Golden crabapple flowers. The pattern the third princess loves most. I closed her eyes for her. In this life I had moved 1 step ahead, but they had still struck. It was just a pity they were too late. Chen Mama's final words were enough. I stood up and instructed, lock down the courtyard. Do not leak any news. Collect every single item in this room. Not even a thread may be left behind. I returned to my own room and did not sleep the entire night. The next morning, my father sent word that the emperor had secretly ordered the inner palace to investigate the third princess's whereabouts that night, but there were still no results. That was not surprising. Xiao Lingyi had been favored for many years. The palace and the court were filled with her people. It was unrealistic to topple her in a single moment. That was why, from the very beginning, I had never planned to rely solely on the emperor. I had my people spread a rumor without naming anyone. The newly appointed top scholar had secretly met with a noble figure 3 nights earlier, then hurriedly tried to pin an illicit affair on the legitimate daughter of the Minister of Rights. The news spread like wildfire. The capital loved gossip, especially when it concerned the Yonglin banquet itself. Before half a day had passed, every tea house and tavern was buzzing. Have you heard? Top scholar Wei's rush to marry the Shen family's legitimate daughter wasn't out of deep affection. He was trying to cover something up. Cover what? What else could it be? The person who entered his residence that night wasn't the Shen family's young miss at all. It was the most exalted lady in the entire palace. You're talking nonsense. I never said who it was, you're the one imagining things. The words multiplied tenfold, then 100-fold. Rumors were the sharpest blade that could wound a person and the easiest way to force someone to reveal their weakness. In the previous life, I had not understood this. I had only known how to cry and explain, waiting for others to clear my name. In this life, I refuse to play the victim. If you dare to destroy me, I will stir this entire muddy pond until no one can stay clean. Sure enough, that same afternoon the princess's residence could no longer sit still. First, 2 storytellers were dragged away by the city guards. Then several gossiping matrons were beaten until their mouths bled. Wei Linquan's move was exactly the same as in the previous life. He always believed silencing people would solve everything. But he had forgotten. The more you try to suppress something, the more people will suspect it. I was sitting by the window listening to the report when my maid man suddenly ran in. Young miss, there's someone outside claiming to be from the Court of Judicial Review. I froze. Who? Man lowered her voice. An attendant of Junior Minister Liu. His name is Chongqing. My heart skipped a beat. I stood up at once. Have Chongqing wait in the main hall. The moment I entered, Chongqing clasped his hands and saluted. Miss Shen, my lord instructed me to deliver a message. What message? Chongqing looked at me with a somewhat complicated expression. My lord said he will enter the capital tonight. My breathing hitched. Lu Dingzhou had returned 2 full days earlier than in the previous life. In the previous life, at this time he had still been in Jiangnan investigating a salt smuggling case. The day he returned to the capital, he had brought back a ledger that angered many powerful figures. That ledger involved the Salt Administration, the Ministry of Rights Springs examinations, and even the princess's residence. After my death, Lu Dingzhou had followed that very ledger to investigate Wei Linquan and Xiao Lingyi. Unfortunately, by the time he uncovered the truth, I had already become a cold corpse. In this life, he had returned early. There was only one possibility: someone wanted him dead. I immediately turned back to my room and changed into simple, practical clothes. A man was startled. Young miss, are you going out? The master said these days you must not. I tightened the sash of my cloak, my voice steady. If I am not mistaken, Lu Dingzhou's entry into the capital tonight will not be peaceful. In the previous life, I had known nothing, and only heard afterward that he had been ambushed on the return road and seriously wounded. In this life I knew, so I could not allow the past to repeat itself. I took the Shen family guards and borrowed a squad of my second uncle's old subordinates. We took a shortcut and raced toward the western city's official road. The night was heavy and the wind howled fiercely. By the time we arrived, a fierce battle was already raging on the official road. Lu Dingzhou, dressed in black robes, wielded a long blade stained with blood. A wound bled on his shoulder. Only 4 or 5 men remained at his side. Clearly he had been fighting the entire way. The black-clad assassins facing him struck with lethal intent. They meant to kill every last witness. I did not hesitate. I raised my hand and fired a signal arrow. The Shen family guards charged forward. I stood on the slope, bow in hand, eyes fixed on the chaotic melee. Almost immediately, an assassin slipped behind Lu Dingzhou. I drew and released in one smooth motion. The arrow pierced the man's throat. Lu Dingzhou looked up. Across the darkness and the thick smell of blood, our eyes met. He recognized me. My heart clenched. Without thinking, I shouted at him, Lu Dingzhou, fall back east. He said not a single unnecessary word. He swung his blade to force back the 2 men in front of him, and immediately retreated in the direction I had indicated. The battle lasted only a short while. When the last surviving assassin bit down on his poison and died, I stepped across the blood-soaked ground and walked up to Lu Dingzhou. His shoulder wound was severe. His face was pale, yet he still stood firm. I was about to speak when he glanced at the bow in my hand, and then at the Shen family guards behind me. Shen Zhaoning? His voice was low and hoarse, carrying the metallic scent of blood. Still that same tone, still refusing to speak like a normal person. The tension in my chest vanished instantly. I put on a cold expression and said, Junior Minister Liu truly has a big reputation. I led my men out in the middle of the night to rescue a dog, not you. Chongqing, standing to the side, looked as if his head was about to explode from second-hand embarrassment. To my surprise, Lu Dingzhou did not get angry. Instead, the corner of his mouth curved up ever so slightly. So you came to rescue me. He was this badly injured and still had the energy to argue with me. I frowned, stepped closer, and said firmly, let me see your wound. Lu Dingzhou did not dodge. I reached out and unfastened the armor on his shoulder. The moment my palm touched him, his entire body tensed. My movement paused. I looked up at him. It hurts, he said, lowering his eyes. His gaze was very deep. It would be strange if it didn't hurt. I had no interest in exposing his lie. I signaled Chongqing to bring the medicine, and efficiently helped him staunch the bleeding, right there on the official road. The surroundings gradually quieted. Only the wind and the soft crackle of torches remained. Lu Dingzhou suddenly spoke. On the way into the city, I heard what happened at the Qianglin banquet. My hands paused. Sure enough, a moment later he continued slowly. Miss Shen told His Majesty in front of everyone that she admires me and that I already knew. I lifted my eyes and met his gaze. He was looking at me too. The night wind was strong. Strands of his hair, stained with blood, fluttered against his cold, handsome face, yet his eyes were not cold at all. I remained silent for a moment, then admitted it outright. Yes, the situation was urgent. I needed someone who could pressure Wei Linchuan, and I needed a reason that would make His Majesty continue the investigation. In the entire capital, you were the most suitable choice. I spoke frankly. Lu Dingzhou actually makes sense. I was stunned. He believed me just like that? Before I could speak, he added indifferently, but since you used me, you should at least give me an explanation. I frowned. What kind of explanation do you want? Lu Dingzhou looked at me, his voice neither fast nor slow. The words you said in front of His Majesty have already been spoken. Don't be in such a hurry to take them back. My heart suddenly pounded hard. Neither Chongqing nor Ah Man dared make a sound. They lowered their heads in unison. I pretended not to understand. Junior Minister Liu, I don't follow. Lu Dingzhou did not press me. He simply said, there's no rush. First deal with Wei Linchuan. Afterward, we will settle our own account. I had thought that saving Lu Dingzhou tonight would mean I had seized the initiative. I never expected that early the next morning, Wei Linchuan would come to the Shen residence of his own accord. He wore a moon-white scholar's robe, still carrying that same clean, upright appearance. If I had not already died once, who could have imagined what kind of heart was hidden beneath that face? He was stopped in the front hall. My father refused to see him, so I went myself. I wanted to see how far he could keep up the act. The moment he saw me, Wei Linchuan dismissed his servants and lowered his voice. Zhaoning, do you truly intend to be so heartless? I sat in the seat of honor and did not even order tea for him. Top scholar Wei, you are mistaken. The one who was heartless first. Wasn't it you? Wei Linchuan looked at me. Anger and suspicion swirled in his eyes. After a long while he suddenly smiled. Yesterday I still found it strange. You have always been proud and valued your reputation above all else. How could you remain so calm in the hall, and even calmly shift all the dirty water onto someone else step by step? Now I understand. He took 2 steps closer and lowered his voice. Shen Zhaoning, you have also returned, haven't you? My spine went rigid. Sure enough, he had been reborn too. No wonder. No wonder in this life he had reacted faster, struck more ruthlessly, and tried to destroy my reputation even more urgently than before. He knew I would no longer let him manipulate me, so from the very beginning, he had wanted to crush me to death. I raised my eyes and looked at him, my expression unchanged. I don't understand what you're saying. You don't understand? Wei Linchuan's smile deepened. Then let me use words you're more familiar with. He stared straight at me and said slowly, Zhaoning, did the poison that burned through your guts feel pleasant? My fingertips clenched tight. The metallic stench of blood from the previous life seemed to surge up my throat once more. Seeing my reaction, Wei Linchuan finally confirmed it completely. He said softly, so you really do remember. Then you should understand that in the previous life you could not defeat me, and in this life, it will be the same. What was Lu Dingzhou? What was the Shen family? She actually thought getting one step ahead meant she could flip the entire board. I looked at him, fury surging in my chest, but I refused to lose my composure. Wei Linchuan, in the previous life I lost not because you were so formidable, but because I was blind enough to trust you. In this life I would never trust him again. The smile on Wei Linchuan's face faded slightly. He stared at me for a moment, then suddenly regained that gentle, refined expression. Fine, let's see who dies first. With that, he turned to leave. I called him back. Wei Linchuan. He turned his head. I met his gaze and spoke each word deliberately. Yesterday you used my missing handkerchief as proof. Allow me to return the favor with one sentence of my own. 3 nights ago, was the carriage embroidered with golden crab apple flowers stable when it stopped in the back alley of the top scholar's residence. In that instant, Wei Linchuan's expression finally changed. A chill surged into his eyes. I knew I had struck his sore spot, but I felt no fear. Because once a person panicked, they would make mistakes, and what I wanted most was for him to slip up. Wei Linchuan had not gone far when Ah Man rushed in, her face frantic. Young miss, something's wrong. Someone from the palace has arrived. I looked up. Who? Ah Man's face was deathly pale. It's the chief eunuch who serves beside the third princess. He brings an oral decree from the empress, summoning you into the palace at once. I rose slowly, adjusted my sleeves, and thought, finally it has come. Xiao Lingyi could no longer sit still. Perfect. I had been waiting for her for a very long time. I followed the chief eunuch into the palace, but we did not head toward Fengyi Palace. When the sedan chair stopped, I lifted my head and saw the plaque with 3 large characters. Changel Hall. This was Xiao Lingyi's personal residence. Ah Man's expression shifted. She opened her mouth to speak, but I gripped her hand. We have already come this far. There is no turning back now. I straightened my sleeves and stepped inside. Incense for calming the spirit burned inside the hall. The palace servants on all sides stood with heads bowed in complete silence, the quiet so heavy it pressed down on one's heart. Xiao Lingyi sat on the high seat, dressed in full palace attire, her appearance perfectly composed. There was no trace of the brief panic she had shown at yesterday's banquet. She looked at me, and the corners of her lips curved into a faint smile. Shen Zhaoning, you certainly have guts. I performed the proper greeting, my voice calm. This subject received the oral decree and did not dare refuse. She slowly set down her teacup. When did this princess ever issue an oral decree in the empress's name? Ah Man's face turned even whiter. I, however, was not surprised in the slightest. The fact that she had dared to lure me here proved she was desperate. And when someone grew desperate, they lost all restraint. I raised my head and looked straight at her. Since the princess has gone to such lengths, why not speak plainly? What does your highness want from this subject? Xiao Lingyi stared at me for a long time before suddenly laughing. In the past, this princess truly underestimated you. Linchuan once said you were nothing more than a high-born young lady, raised in the boudoir Samyeon, who only cared about rules and reputation. A little pressure, a little threat, and you would obediently accept your fate. Who could have guessed you would actually dare flip the table right there, in the middle of the Qianglin banquet? Her tone was light, but every word chilled me to the bone. In the previous life, they had looked at me exactly the same way. They thought I had been raised with strict propriety. A good, obedient girl should quietly accept the false accusations, accept the marriage, and accept the road to death. I suppressed the emotions churning in my chest and answered evenly, this subject does not understand what the princess is saying. Xiao Lingyi stood and walked toward me, step by step till she was very close. Her voice dropped to a whisper. It doesn't matter if you don't understand. Today this princess summoned you here to offer you a way out. Go out right now, kneel before His Majesty, and confess that yesterday you were ashamed and resentful, so you deliberately dragged Lu Dingzhou and this princess into the mess. Then tell your father you agree to marry Wei Linchuan. As long as you are willing to admit it, this princess guarantees the Shen family will remain unharmed, and your elder brother's case can end here. I looked up at her and asked, and if I refuse? The smile on Xiao Lingyi's face vanished inch by inch. Then you are refusing the easy way out only to choose the hard one. Shen Zhaoning, this princess can make your elder brother's death look like an accident, and I can make your father follow in his footsteps. As for Lu Dingzhou, she paused, cold intent flashing in her eyes. He got lucky this time. Next time he may not be so fortunate. My fingers clenched inside my sleeves. So the truth about my elder brother's death really was connected to her. The ambush on the official road last night had also been her doing. I looked at her and asked word by word. 3 nights ago, the princess rode a carriage embroidered with golden crabapple flowers to the top scholar's residence. Yesterday you sent people to silence Chen Mama. Since the princess dared to act, why are you suddenly afraid that this subject will speak? Her gaze turned sharp as a blade. What exactly have you found out? I did not answer. Instead, I took a small golden tassel from my sleeve and held it in my palm. This is what Chen Mama was clutching before she died. Does the princess recognize it? The tassel had been pulled from between Chen Mama's fingers last night. I had ordered every item in her room collected. Not even a single thread left behind. The effort had not been wasted. Xiao Lingyi stared at the tassel, her expression finally sinking. She reached out to snatch it, but I pulled my hand back and slipped it into my sleeve once more. What is the princess so anxious about? It is merely a tassel. This subject has not yet brought it before His Majesty. She narrowed her eyes. Shen Zhaoning, do you really think this is enough to topple this princess? No, I answered quickly, which is why this subject has other things as well. Of course the last part was a bluff, but someone who had done guilty deeds feared most of all that others knew too much. Sure enough, she stared at me, her expression shifting several times before she finally laughed coldly. It seems we cannot keep you alive after all. The moment her words fell, the hall doors were shoved open and a cold voice rang out. The third princess truly has great authority. I turned my head. The person who had arrived was the empress. Behind her stood two senior palace maids and the emperor, whose face was ashen. Xiao Lingyi's complexion turned deathly white in an instant. My heart pounded. After returning from the official road last night, Lu Dingzhou had only told me to enter the palace without worry, and said nothing more. It turned out he had already made arrangements. The empress swept a cold gaze over Xiao Lingyi. When did this empress ever give you permission to impersonate an oral decree? The emperor's expression grew even uglier. He stared fixedly at Xiao Lingyi, the pressure in his eyes so heavy it felt suffocating. Just now you said you could someone's death look like an accident. Xiao Lingyi's knees buckled and she dropped to the floor at once. Imperial father, your daughter did not mean it that way. Your daughter was only joking with Miss Shen. I knelt as well and raised the golden tassel high in my hands. Your Majesty, this subject would never dare speak nonsense. These past few days, someone first used this subject's handkerchief to frame me, then murdered the wet nurse at my side to silence her. And last night even dispatched assassins to ambush Junior Minister Liu. This subject was truly terrified and could only protect herself. The emperor stared at the tassel and did not speak immediately. The senior palace maid beside him stepped forward, took it, examined it twice, and said softly, Your Majesty, the golden thread and knotting style on this tassel are indeed the exact designs supplied exclusively by the Imperial Wardrobe Bureau to the third princess's residence. Xiao Lingyi suddenly lifted her head. This proves nothing. Gifts and exchanges within the palace are common. Before she could finish, the emperor cut her off coldly. Enough. The hall fell deathly silent. The emperor looked at her as if seeing his most favored daughter for the first time. From this day forward, you are confined to Changel Hall. No one is permitted to visit. As for Wei Linquan, Lu Dingzhou, and Shen Zhaoning, tomorrow morning all of you will appear before us in the hall. I lowered my head and accepted the decree. Xiao Lingyi glared at me, hatred nearly spilling from her eyes, but I felt no fear. The more frantic she became, the easier it would be for her to lose control, and losing control was exactly what I wanted. When I left the palace, a black-roofed carriage was already waiting outside the gates. Chongqing stood beside it and saluted me. Miss Shen, my lord invites you to speak with him. I boarded the carriage. The moment the curtain fell, the outside wind was shut away. Lu Dingzhou sat inside. The wound on his shoulder had been freshly bandaged. His face was still a little pale, but his expression was steady. The instant I sat down, he looked at me. Did the princess make things difficult for you? It was manageable, I said. If not for you, I might not have made it out today. Lu Dingzhou replied indifferently. It wasn't me. His Majesty simply wanted to hear the truth himself. I paused, then quickly understood. The ambush last night had shown the emperor that someone dared to assassinate a junior minister of the Court of Judicial Review right outside the capital. Whatever lay behind it was clearly more than a mere romantic scandal. Once suspicion had taken root, His Majesty would not let it go. I looked at him. What exactly do you have in your hands? Lu Dingzhou remained silent for a moment, then took an old ledger from the hidden compartment behind him and placed it in front of me. The cover was worn, the corners badly frayed. I opened the first page and my breathing stopped. I recognized the handwriting at once. It belonged to my elder brother Shen Changche. My hand trembled slightly. Lu Dingzhou spoke in a low voice. This is what I obtained in the Jiangnan Salt Administration. Before he died, your elder brother had discovered irregularities in the flow of salt silver. He copied the most important pages and had someone hide them in a graveyard in Jiangnan. By the time I arrived, the old caretaker of the graveyard had already been silenced. The ledger nearly went up in flames, but we managed to save it. I turned the pages one by one. The colder my heart grew, the more clearly everything was recorded. Over the past 3 years, every quarter a sum of silver from the Salt administration had passed through several intermediaries and flowed into a private warehouse in the capital. The nominal owner of that warehouse was a merchant, but in reality it belonged to the in-laws of the chief steward of the third princess's residence. Several more pages listed the names of assassins and their comings and goings. Among them were 2 names I had heard in my previous life. One had appeared in the outer city on the day my elder brother died. The other had stood guard at the Wei residence when I was locked in their dungeon. I raised my head and looked at Lu Dingzhou. The reason you were ambushed last night was not because of the Salt case. It was because of this ledger. He nodded. There was also another letter your elder brother left behind. He produced a second letter. The paper had turned brittle with age. I opened it and my vision darkened. In the letter my elder brother wrote that he suspected Wei Linquan had long since pledged himself to the third princess. Wei Linquan came from a poor scholarly family and appeared upright on the surface, but in truth he was an expert at currying favor. He used the third princess as a stepping stone, recruiting disciples for her and opening channels between the Ministry of Rights and the Salt administration. My elder brother had also discovered that before the spring examinations, someone had contacted the examiners. If the investigation continued, even our father might be implicated. At the end of the letter he wrote only one sentence: "If anything happens to me, do not act rashly. Protect Zhaoning first." I stared at those words until my eyes finally reddened. So even on the verge of death, my elder brother was still thinking of me. The carriage remained quiet for a long time. Lu Dingzhou did not urge me. He simply offered a clean handkerchief. I did not take it. I forced the tears back myself. This was not the time to cry. I folded the letter carefully, tucked it into my sleeve and asked him, "Tomorrow in the hall, what do you plan to do?" Lu Dingzhou looked at me. "Wei Linquan will strike first. He will insist that we conspired to frame him and will try to drag both the Lu and Shen families down with him. Therefore a ledger alone is not enough. We still need a witness." I lifted my eyes to him. "You have already found one." Lu Dingzhou said nothing. He simply lifted a corner of the carriage curtain. Behind us followed an inconspicuous green cloth carriage. Chongqing spoke softly from outside. "My lord, she has been brought." My heart beat faster. Immediately afterward I heard a familiar trembling voice from behind. "Eldest sister." It was Shen Rozhen. Shen Rozhen was escorted into the small courtyard, her entire body shaking. In just 2 days she had grown painfully thin, dark circles ringed her eyes, and 2 clear handprints marked her face. I frowned. Who hit her? She kept her head lowered and did not dare look at me. Chongqing reported from the side. "This morning someone disguised as a servant from the Shen residence went to the ancestral hall with medicine and a bowl of calming soup. The second young miss refused to drink it, so the intruder attacked. Fortunately our people were keeping close watch and caught them in time." My gaze turned icy. Xiaoling Yi and Wei Linquan had already begun silencing witnesses. Shen Rozhen finally collapsed. She dropped to her knees with a thud and cried until she could hardly breathe. "Eldest sister, I was wrong. I truly know I was wrong. It was Wei Linquan who tricked me. He said that if I helped him just once, he would marry me as his principal wife. He said your proud personality meant you could never hold the position of legitimate wife, even if you married in. As long as I was sensible, the household would still be under my control in the end." I looked at her. The anger in my heart had mostly cooled, leaving only frost. Even now she was still saying such things. I asked indifferently, "Did you give him the handkerchief?" She nodded, tears streaming without stop. "And your calligraphy, your sachets, the writing paper you always used. I secretly took them all and gave them to him. He said he wanted to practice writing in your style so he could compose love poems to please you later." I believed him. 3 nights ago, a palace maid from the princess's side came to find him personally. I saw with my own eyes the carriage stopped in the back alley, its curtain embroidered with golden crabapple flowers. The next morning Wei Linquan came to see me. Had told me to give him your handkerchief, and to deliberately leak word to the servants in the residence, before the Qianglin banquet, that these past few days, you had been restless and seemed to have someone in your heart. By the time she finished, she was crying so hard she had no strength left. "Eldest sister, I really didn't want to kill you. I only wanted to fight for myself once." I looked at her and suddenly found it laughable. In the previous life, when I died in the dungeon, she had cried exactly like this, crying and saying she had no choice, yet every single time her no choice required using me as a sacrifice. I suppressed the disgust in my heart and continued, Is there anything else in your possession that Wei Linchuan gave you? Shen Rouzhen's expression froze. I stared at her. We have already reached this point. If you still hide anything, it is no longer stupidity, it is courting death. Her whole body trembled. Finally, she took a small incense box from her sleeve. Beneath the bottom layer was a tiny folded slip of paper. I opened it and my breathing stopped. There were only 2 short lines. Tomorrow at the banquet, if she refuses to admit it, follow the princess's previous instructions. I will handle the rest. No signature, but I recognized the handwriting at once. It was Wei Linchuan's. Shen Rouzhen sobbed. I kept it all this time. I thought there would come a day when he would turn around and look at me once. I closed my eyes and handed the paper to Lu Dingzhou. That is enough. This slip of paper, together with the ledger, the tassel, and the assassin's confession, was more than enough to nail both Wei Linchuan and Xiao Lingyi in one strike. Lu Dingzhou put the paper away, his voice very light. Tomorrow in the hall you will go as well. Shen Rouzhen suddenly raised her head, her face as white as paper. I have to. I looked at her. You dared to do it, so you must dare to admit it. If you testify in front of everyone, I will spare your life. If you try to back out, even I will not be able to protect you. Her lips quivered. After a long time she answered in a trembling voice, All right. At that moment Changqing entered quickly once more. My lord, the survivor has woken up. I froze. What survivor? Lu Dingzhou looked at me and finally told the truth. Last night on the official road, the last assassin who bit the poison did not die completely. I had him brought back. I looked at him momentarily at a loss for words. He had been badly wounded last night, yet he had still managed to handle everything so thoroughly. Lu Dingzhou met my gaze, his expression calm. Shen Zhaoning, I told you we would deal with Wei Linchuan first. My heart stirred faintly, but in the end I looked away. Junior Minister Lu truly leaves no gaps when he handles a case, I remarked. He answered in a low voice. You praise me too lightly. Even at a time like this he still had the mood to bicker. The next morning at the Grand Court Assembly, not a single civil or military official was missing. This was no longer a simple romantic scandal. It involved a princess, a top scholar, the Ministry of Rights, a salt case, and the Court of Judicial Review. Everyone knew that today a major incident would occur. When I entered the hall with my father, Wei Linchuan was already kneeling in the center. He had changed into official robes and his face was calmer, in fact, than it had been 2 days earlier. When he saw me enter, he lifted his eyes. Coldness lurked in their depths. I knew he had not yet given up. Sure enough, the moment the emperor spoke, Wei Linchuan kowtowed deeply. Your Majesty, this subject is guilty. The entire hall fell silent. The emperor sat high above, his voice betraying neither joy nor anger. What is your crime? Wei Linchuan raised his head, his expression candid. This subject's crime is that his feelings were difficult to restrain. I misplaced my affection and caused this storm, tarnishing the purity of the imperial family. The moment the words left his mouth, many people frowned. I, however, was not surprised at all. He wanted to drag a monumental case back down to a mere affair between a man and a woman. As long as the matter remained a private romance, there would still be room to maneuver. If it were confirmed to involve the salt case, the raising of assassins, and framing court officials, then he would truly have nowhere to be buried. Wei Linchuan continued. Miss Shen and this subject did indeed share a private relationship. It is only that she has now changed her heart and turned to Junior Minister Lu, so the two of them conspired to frame this subject and the third princess instead. This subject does not dare implicate the princess, but the so-called tassel and the so-called rumors in Miss Shen's possession are nothing but groundless accusations. As for the ledger in Junior Minister Lu's hands, he raised his head, looked at Lu Dingzhou, and actually smiled. Who knows whether someone used the salt investigation as a cover for personal revenge and forged evidence. My father immediately roared in fury. Absurd. Wei Linchuan remained unhurried. He took several sheets of paper from his sleeve. Your Majesty, these are letters and calligraphy Miss Shen wrote to this subject. They contain many affectionate words. If this subject and she had no connection at all, where would these come from? I glanced at them and laughed coldly in my heart. The handwriting on the paper looked somewhat similar to mine at first glance, but the stroke habits and choice of words were all wrong. In the previous life I had seen them. They were the result of Shen Rouzhen practicing my handwriting for half a year. Wei Linchuan had truly kept this move until the very end. The emperor did not accept the papers, he simply said indifferently. Shen Zhaoning, what do you have to say? I was about to speak when a trembling announcement came from outside the hall. The second young miss of the Shen family, Shen Rouzhen, requests an audience. Wei Linchuan's expression finally changed. I turned my head. Shen Ruzhen, dressed in plain white, her face deathly pale, was practically being supported as she walked in. When she reached the center of the hall and knelt, her whole body shook. But she still gritted her teeth and spoke. "Your Majesty, those letters were not written by my eldest sister. It was this subject who imitated her handwriting." The hall erupted. Wei Linchuan shouted. "Shen Ruzhen, have you gone mad?" Being shouted at only made her laugh through her tears. "Yes, I have gone mad. If I had not gone mad, I would have been killed by you and the princess long ago to silence me," she kowtowed, her voice trembling, yet growing clearer with every word. This subject admired Wei Linchuan and believed his lies. "I stole my eldest sister's handkerchief, calligraphy, and sachets for him. I even wrote secret messages in her place." 3 nights ago, this subject personally witnessed the third princess's carriage stop in the back alley of the top scholar's residence. The next morning, Wei Linchuan told me to give him my eldest sister's handkerchief, and said that if she refused to admit anything, we should follow the original plan, slander her reputation, and force her into marriage. Finished, she took the incense box and the folded paper from her bosom and raised them high above her head with both hands. A palace servant stepped forward, received them, and presented them to the emperor. After reading, killing intent had already appeared in his majesty's eyes. Wei Linchuan suddenly laughed loudly. "One piece of paper and the testimony of a concubine's daughter are enough to convict me. Shen Ruzhen lives in the same residence as Shen Zhaoning. It is perfectly normal for her to imitate her sister and create false evidence." Then he suddenly turned toward Lu Dingzhou. "Junior Minister Lu, you claim you were ambushed on the official road last night, and that it was extremely dangerous, but who knows whether that was a play you staged yourself? For Shen Zhaoning's sake, you did not hesitate to use the salt case as your stage and even dared to fabricate a court assassination. You truly have enormous gall." Lu Dingzhou finally spoke. He stood in the center of the hall, his voice not loud yet it silenced the entire assembly. "Top Scholar Wei's tongue truly is formidable. It is only a pity you are too anxious." Wei Linchuan narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Lu Dingzhou raised his hand. From outside the hall, men immediately dragged in a black-clad assassin covered in blood. The man collapsed the moment he entered. 2 fingers were missing from his right hand. He had clearly endured no small amount of torture. Wei Linchuan's face changed drastically. Lu Dingzhou said calmly, "Last night on the official road, not all of your men died. This survivor has already signed a confession and placed his fingerprint at the Court of Judicial Review. He stated that he was acting under orders from the chief steward of the third princess's residence to take my life and, conveniently, to seize the ledger." The emperor slammed his hand on the armrest and ordered the confession brought forward. When it was presented, the entire hall fell silent as a tomb. Cold sweat finally broke out on Wei Linchuan's forehead, yet he still struggled. "Even so, it only proves someone wanted to kill Junior Minister Lu. What does that have to do with me? What does it have to do with the princess?" I had been waiting for exactly those words. I stepped forward and kowtowed before the emperor. "Your Majesty, this subject still has a letter my elder brother left behind. Please read it." The letter was presented. My father's eyes had already turned red. After the emperor finished reading, his expression could no longer be described with mere displeasure. In the letter, my elder brother had written clearly that he had investigated Wei Linchuan's use of the third princess's power to interfere in the spring examinations, collude with the Salt administration, and secretly raise assassins. He had also written that he was being watched, and that if he died, it would most likely not be an accident. This letter was the final stone that crushed Wei Linchuan. Wei Linchuan could no longer remain kneeling. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Xiao Lingyi, who had stayed silent on her knees beside him the entire time. "Princess." The single word carried both a plea for help and bitter unwillingness. Xiao Lingyi's face turned deathly pale. She closed her eyes, knowing she could no longer conceal the truth. Yet she was still Xiao Lingyi after all. Even at this stage, she wanted to wash her hands clean of everything. "Imperial father, your daughter admits she met with Wei Linchuan in private several times, but your daughter only cherished his talent and wished to recruit a capable minister for the court on behalf of the dynasty. As for the salt case, the assassins and Shen Changche's death, your daughter knew nothing about any of them." She turned her head to look at Wei Linchuan, her gaze sharp enough to terrify. "It was all him. He used your daughter's name to commit those deeds, and he was the one who clung to your daughter and refused to let go. I watched her and felt nothing but ridicule." Even now, she still wanted to use the same old trick, pushing all the blame onto Wei Linchuan, while painting herself as a princess who had simply been deceived. Unfortunately, this time I would not give her the chance. I slowly raised my head and looked at the Emperor. Your Majesty, this subject has one more question. If the third princess claims she only cherished his talent, then why did she secretly visit the back gate of the top scholar's residence in the middle of the night 3 days ago? And yesterday in Changle Hall, why did she try to force the subject to change her testimony and marry Wei Linchuan, even threatening the lives of this subject's elder brother and junior minister Liu? If it was truly only about talent, why go to such extremes? Xiao Lingyi suddenly glared at me, flames of fury nearly bursting from her eyes. Shen Zhaoning, you're spouting nonsense. I looked at her coldly. Am I spouting nonsense? Yesterday both Her Majesty the Empress and Your Majesty heard those words with your own ears. The moment the words left my mouth, she stiffened completely. In her panic yesterday, she had forgotten that both the Emperor and the Empress had personally witnessed her threats. The Emperor stared at her and spoke word by word. Do you still wish to continue making excuses? Xiao Lingyi's lips trembled, but in the end she could not utter a single word. The grand hall finally fell into complete silence, so quiet it weighed heavily on everyone's hearts. The Emperor looked at Wei Linchuan and Xiao Lingyi kneeling in the center of the hall. His gaze grew colder with each passing second. Wei Linchuan colluded with a princess, framed court officials, plotted the death of Xin Changche, raised assassins, and ambushed an imperial official. You have committed treason and defied your sovereign. What do you have to say for yourself? Wei Linchuan knelt on the ground and remained silent for a long time before suddenly letting out a laugh. There was no trace of his former gentle refinement left in that laugh, only dark coldness. The winner becomes king, the loser becomes a bandit. This subject has nothing left to say. However, Your Majesty, the reason this subject has ended up like this today is also because you indulged the princess and gave her the audacity to act so recklessly. This subject merely went along with the current. The moment those words fell, the entire hall fell deathly silent. Xiao Lingyi jerked her head up and shrieked, Wei Linchuan, you are out of line. Wei Linchuan ignored her. He only stared fixedly at the Emperor, madness swirling in his eyes. This subject studied diligently for over 10 years. Everything I have is no less than those noble scions. Why were they born with a silver spoon and allowed to soar to the heavens, while this subject must be trampled beneath their feet just to take one step forward? The princess took a liking to this subject. That was this subject's opportunity. Why should I not seize it? If Shen Changche stood in my way, I eliminated him. If Shen Zhaoning was an obstacle, I destroyed her reputation. When Lu Dingzhou found the ledger, I sent men to kill and silence him. Where did this subject go wrong? This subject only wanted to climb higher. By the end, his voice had grown hoarse and raw. I stood to the side, my heart completely calm. This was the real Wei Linchuan. In the previous life, when he coaxed me, deceived me, and controlled me, he had always spoken with this same righteous fervor. He had never once felt he was in the wrong. He only ever believed others were blocking his path. Xiao Lingyi, however, had completely fallen apart. She crawled frantically toward the Emperor on her knees, sobbing until her hair ornaments came loose, and her hair fell into disarray. Imperial Father, your daughter knows she was wrong. Your daughter truly knows she was wrong. Your daughter was momentarily confused. It was Wei Linchuan who seduced your daughter. He was the one who taught your daughter to do those things. The Emperor looked at her, and there was no trace of affection left in his eyes. You are my daughter. I raised you with my own hands. I gave you honor. I gave you dignity. I gave you far more tolerance than anyone else. Yet how did you repay me? You colluded with an outsider to interfere in the imperial examinations, used the court's salt silver to raise private assassins in your residence, silenced people and framed loyal ministers, all for the sake of one man. Xiao Lingyi cried until she could no longer speak. She collapsed onto the floor, her shoulders and back shaking violently. The Emperor closed his eyes as if forcing down the last remnants of his affection. When he opened them again, his voice was cold and unwavering. The third Princess Xiao Lingyi is stripped of her title and reduced to a commoner. She is to be sent to the imperial clan court and granted a white silk cord. Wei Linchuan is to be sent to the imperial prison. In 3 days he will be executed by beheading. The entire staff of the third princess's residence and all involved parties are to be arrested and handed over to the Court of Judicial Review for thorough investigation. The moment the verdict was pronounced, I finally let out a long breath. The net that had strangled me to death in my previous life had finally been torn apart. But the matter was not over yet. I stepped forward and kowtowed deeply. Your Majesty, this subject has one more request. The Emperor looked at me. I raised my head, my voice steady. This subject begs your majesty to clear my elder brother Shen Chongshe's name, investigate the true cause of his death, and restore his honor. Additionally, this subject's wet nurse, Chen, remained loyal to her master and was killed to silence her. I beg your majesty to grant her a proper burial and bestow compensation upon her family. The emperor remained silent for a moment before nodding. Approved. I kowtowed once more until my forehead touched the golden bricks. This subject thanks your majesty. When I stepped out of the hall, the sunlight was so bright it made my eyes sting. My father stood under the corridor, his expression complicated. After a long time, he finally spoke. Joning, these past few days I have underestimated you. I looked at him and said nothing. In the previous life, what I had wanted most was for my father to believe me and protect me, but I never received it even until death. In this life he had finally stood by my side, yet the longing I once felt was no longer there. Some things died once and could never be fully recovered. Perhaps he saw that too. He remained silent for a long time before speaking softly. If your elder brother were still alive and could see you today, he would finally be at peace. My throat tightened. In the end I held back my tears. My elder brother is gone, but I have at least prevented the Shen family from meeting the same tragic end as in the previous life. That is enough. 3 days later, Wei Linquan sent word from the imperial prison requesting to see me. When Chongqing came to ask, I was sitting in the courtyard reviewing the old ledgers my elder brother had left behind. Man gritted her teeth in fury. Does he still have the face to meet anyone? Young miss, you absolutely must not go. I closed the ledger, stood up, and said, there are a few things I want to say to him myself. The imperial prison was cold and gloomy. Wei Linquan wore prisoner's clothes, his face ashen. Shackles still bound his wrists. In just 3 short days he had become painfully gaunt, bearing no resemblance to the elegant top scholar he once was. When he saw me he froze for a moment before smiling bitterly. You really did come. I stood outside the cell door and did not take a single step closer. What do you want to say? Wei Linquan looked at me for a very long time before asking in a low voice, Jiaoning, in all those years in the previous life, did you truly never have any feelings for me at all? I let out a short laugh. Even now, at death's door he could still ask such a question. I looked at him and spoke each word clearly. In the previous life when I married you, I truly intended to live well with you. But what about you? You treated me as a shield, a stepping stone, a life that could be discarded at any moment. When you and Xiao Lingyi forced that poison down my throat, did you feel even the slightest bit of tenderness? Wei Linquan's face turned white. He opened his mouth as if wanting to explain something, but I gave him no chance. Wei Linquan, you did not lose to me. You lost to your own greed, to your self-righteousness, and to the fact that you never once treated another person's life as a life. You always believed you simply wanted to climb higher, but what you trampled beneath your feet were people, blood, and lives. You fully deserve to end up like this today. With that, I turned and left. Behind me came his hoarse shout. Shen Jiaoning, if you could do it all over again, would you still choose Lu Dingzhou? My footsteps paused, but I did not turn back. Because at least he had never thought of using me to exchange for his own future. I stepped out of the imperial prison. The sky was bright and the wind was gentle. Standing outside, I felt the heavy resentment that had weighed on my chest for 2 lifetimes finally dissipate. On the day Wei Linquan was executed by beheading, the streets were packed with spectators. Xiao Lingyi took her own life in the imperial clan court on the same day. It was said that before she died, she smashed everything in her room, cursing Wei Linquan for betraying her, cursing the emperor for being heartless, and cursing me for deserving death. But none of that had anything to do with me anymore. After the case was completely closed, the emperor summoned me into the palace to bestow rewards. He said, Shen Jiaoning, you have exposed this case and eliminated a great threat to the dynasty. What do you want? Both my father and my legitimate mother thought I would ask for a good marriage or future prospects for the Shen family. But after thinking for a moment, I simply said, this subject wishes to request 3 things. First, I beg your majesty to posthumously honor my elder brother and allow his spirit tablet to be placed in the main position of the Shen family ancestral hall. Second, I beg your majesty to allow this subject to take over the girls' school my elder brother was preparing while he was alive and continue to operate it. Third, I paused, then looked up at the emperor. This subject begs to be allowed to decide her own marriage. The emperor was momentarily stunned before he burst into laughter. You truly do not ask for much. When I left the palace, Lu Dingzhou was already waiting outside the gates. He was still wearing his dark robes. The wound on his shoulder had not fully healed, yet his posture remained straight and tall. Seeing me walk out, he took 2 steps forward. What did His Majesty reward you with? I glanced at him. He granted me the right to decide my own marriage. Lu Dingzhou's expression froze for a second before he let out a soft, that is very good. After saying that, he fell silent again. I was slightly surprised. With his personality, he should not have been able to hold back like this. I deliberately asked, "Is that all?" Lu Dingzhou looked at me. He rarely remained silent for so long before finally taking a marriage contract from his sleeve. The tips of his ears were faintly red. "Shen Zhouning, do the words you spoke before His Majesty still count today?" I looked at the marriage contract in his hand and for a moment could not speak. In the previous life after I died, my lingering soul had drifted outside the Wei residence and watched him hold my corpse, calling my name over and over again. At that time I had thought that if I could do it all over again, I would never let him stand alone in the cold night like that ever again. Fortunately, in this life it was still not too late. I reached out and accepted the marriage contract, then looked up at him. Lu Dingzhou's Adam's apple bobbed slightly, and his eyes lit up at once. As if afraid I would change my mind, he asked again, "Have you thought it through?" I could not help but laugh. "Lu Dingzhou, do you always talk this much when you're solving cases too?" He looked at me and finally smiled. The last trace of coldness on him melted away completely. A moment later he spoke in a low voice, "There is still one thing I have always wanted to ask." "What is it?" He looked at me, his voice very soft. "On the Lantern Festival night that year, that lantern, did you know all along that I was the one who picked it up?" My heart skipped a beat. So he had always remembered. I did not answer directly. Instead I said deliberately, "Junior Minister Lu, if you want to know, figure it out yourself." He looked at me, then suddenly reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair that had been blown across my temple behind my ear. The motion was gentle, but the warmth of his fingertips made my heart tighten. I don't need to guess anymore. Now I know. 3 months later, my elder brother's girls' school opened once more. The first group of students were all young girls from poor families who had never had the chance to learn to read. On the day the signboard was hung, I went to see it myself. My father stood beside me, his expression complicated. My legitimate mother's eyes reddened as she held my hand and spoke for a long time. I listened quietly, my heart at peace. The Shen family's attitude toward me was finally different in this life compared to the last. But I was no longer the old Shen Zhouning who could only wait for others to protect her. Lu Dingzhou waited for me outside the gate. He was still working at the Court of Judicial Review. The aftermath of the salt case had yet to be fully investigated, and he was so busy his feet barely touched the ground. Yet whenever I went out, he would come to pick me up whenever he had the time. I boarded the carriage. He handed me a warm packet of pastries. "Eat something first to settle your stomach." I accepted it and asked, "Are you not busy today?" Lu Dingzhou gave me a look, his voice calm. "No matter how busy I am, I still have to come home for the wedding." I nearly choked on the pastry. He calmly handed me a cup of tea. "The wedding date was set by your own mouth. Shen Zhouning, don't even think about backing out." I could not help but glare at him. When have I ever tried to back out? He looked at me, the corners of his lips curving up slightly. "Good." The carriage wheels rolled along the busy street. The sounds of people outside never ceased, and the sunlight was just right. I lifted the curtain and looked out, feeling a peace in my heart like never before. In this life, my elder brother's injustice had been cleared. Chen Mama had received a proper burial. Wei Linxuan and Xiao Lingyi had received their just deserts. The Shen family had been preserved, and I had kept myself. I also had my own path to walk, and someone willing to walk it with me. That was enough. Epilogue. Half a year after the wedding, I followed Lu Dingzhou into the Court of Judicial Review's old archives room for the first time. Chongqing stood guard outside while Amen held a cloak, her eyes constantly glancing inside. Dust lay thick in the archives room. I flipped through documents for a long time before finally finding an old case file. Just as I reached out to take it, Lu Dingzhou was one step faster and pulled it out for me. I looked up at him. "Didn't you hate it most when other people touched your files?" His expression remained indifferent. "Other people are other people. You are you." I could not help but smile. Right after that, an old lantern drawing slipped out from within the file. On the paper was a drawing of a rabbit, the lines childish and simple. I froze. It was the lantern I had casually given to a strange young man on the Lantern Festival night when I was 12 years old. I had always thought it had been lost long ago. The tips of Lu Dingzhou's ears turned red. He reached out to put it away, but I was faster and took it first. I looked up at him. "Junior Minister Lu, is this what you meant when you said I didn't need to guess anymore?" He cleared his throat lightly, looking unusually awkward. "That year you gave it to me. I was afraid it would break, so I casually kept it. I looked at him and chose not to expose his lie. Casually kept it once, and then kept it for so many years. Even after I died, he still couldn't bear to throw it away. I slipped the lantern drawing back into the file and reached out to hook his finger. Lu Dingzhou. I looked at him and said softly, "In this life, I will not choose the wrong person again." He paused for a moment, then tightened his grip on my hand with steady strength. "Good. Then make sure you choose correctly this time. Don't choose wrong again."